So, in today's episode, we'll be learning about the USS Defiant prototype. So, we're going to be learning about the Defiant class and the prototype known as the USS Defiant that Captain Sisko was captain over. The USS Defiant is a heavily armed, limited-role Starfleet vessel developed at the Andorras Fleet Yards in response to the Borg threat to the worlds of the Alpha Quadrant and the Beta Quadrant. The project was officially began in 2366 by Starfleet's Advanced Starship Designs Bureau, or ASDB, under less than ideal conditions. As far as the accepted normal sequence of research, development, testing, and evaluation was concerned, fortunately, a number of hardware innovations had designed adaptations were already in the inventory and allowed for an acceptable level of reliability versus speed of the systems, integration, and vehicle construction. The final dimensions of the new ship became 170.68 by 134.11 by 30.1. The Defiant project, overseen by Admiral Battalio Tosh of the ASDB, began with a section of an existing spacecraft design that had just entered the internal system level view stages. No space frame had yet been constructed, and the hull shape was undergoing warp field integrity simulations. The studied vehicles designed, the NXP-2365WP- T, was beginning construction as a fast torpedo attack ship for high warp penetrations of threat defense. The Defiant Pathfinder would have mounted 6 torpedo launchers, 4 in the primary hull and 2 in the engineering hull, capable of firing photon and quantum torpedoes at speeds of up to warp 9.982. So the original design was a fast attack torpedo ship. They then decided to change the design. They added additional components and they turned it into a mobile weapons platform. When the Borg threat drove the design of the Pathfinder vessel, it was decided to compact the platform with warp nacelles and other structures which were pulled in closer to the engineering hull, minimizing the sensor cross-section areas of the vulnerable appendages. It was also deemed necessary to surround the hull with a multi-layer ablative armor, long considered unworkable for production starships. In its additional Borg suppression role, the Defiant class would have produced as few as 6 custom-built copies. The mission of the Defiant did not change radically until it was out of the system integration stage late in the 2370s and into a final hull reforcing. Intelligence gathering efforts had came up upon the Jem'Hadar problem, and in a final years of the spaceworthiness testing 2372, the NX-74205 was redirected to the Deep Space Nine to become a multi-defense platform with orders to defend the space station and the wormhole and Bajor, known as the Defiant. So now we've got an idea of what's the reasoning and some of the design features. Let's kind of talk about what they've done here. So these are the warp nacelles, and you can see they're different than any other warp nacelle that Starfleet has. So they decided that making it so it's harder to hit the warp nacelles, so the warp nacelles aren't deactivated or damaged like most Federation starships, like we were just looking at, where their warp nacelles are spread out. That creates a better warp field. So we know that the warp field of the Defiant isn't going to be as efficient because it's in this protective dome and it's in this awkward shape. Now we got to take consideration the size of the Defiant and the limitations of how many weapons you can put on board a ship as small as this is. So the ship is incredibly well armed for a ship of its size, and like I said, technically it's not really even a ship. It's actually a mobile weapons platform. So when you're thinking about the Defiant and you're looking at the Defiant and you're saying to yourself, well, it doesn't look like any standard Federation starship, it's because it's not a Federation starship. It's a Federation weapons platform that has been modified to have warp nacelles and impulse engines. So one of the weapons the ship has, which is different than any other Federation starship we see, is it's using Federation pulse cannon phasers. So these pulse cannon phasers are unique to Defiant, and we don't see them on any other ship. So let's talk about these pulse phasers, and then let's break them down, and let's figure out what's different about them. Why are they not using Type 10 phasers aboard this ship, and why are they using these pulse phasers instead? The development of pulse phaser cannons applied a new lessons learned to Starfleet Tokyo's R&D facility were large, nearly flawless emitter crystals had been grown in ground-based microgravity chambers. The new crystals, combined with rapid discharge EPS capacitors banks and high-speed beam focusing coils, allowed the phaser discharge to be stored temporarily up to 2.3 nanoseconds within the coils and then released as a layered pulse. The emerging pulse is structured something like an onion and is able to land a target contact that is more difficult to disperse than a standard phaser beam. 4 pulse phasers are located above and below the nacelle root attachments of the main body. So some additional information about the design is these pulse phasers, not only do they hit hard, but they're obviously, you can't disperse the energy, so it's going to be more effective against armor than other ships. So basically think of it as armor penetration phasers. The other thing is the way that these coils and the way that these crystals are set up and designed, they're more efficient. So when Galaxy class starships or any other ship is firing its phasers, eventually those crystals are going to break or become non-usable and need to be repaired. The Defiant's unique traits make it so that not only do these crystals last longer, they're able to produce energy levels that are extremely high, and they're able to penetrate armor and shields and hit harder. So let's say that you have like a shield and you use a Type X phaser and you hit it for 65,000 points of damage. So depending on the armor and then the type of shields, it can disperse a certain amount of that energy. And what this is saying is that even though the Defiant, because we've seen the weapon points around 32,500, which is significantly better than Type 9 phasers, but it's not as high as Type 10 phasers. But you're hitting, and more of that energy is actually hitting the shields or the armor, depending on what you're targeting, and it's not being dissipated. So these weapons, not only do they last longer, you can actually fire more and they will last longer. So these weapons, though they're expensive, when I say expensive, I mean they're time consuming to make and they're hard to make because of the necessities and the specialized crystals, they are extremely effective weapons. So some additional information that people should be aware of about the Defiant. Most of the parts that are on the Defiant are coming from the Galaxy class project. So the Galaxy class starship components are almost identical on this ship. And this is one of those things that I didn't know, that I just found this out while doing the manual about the full breakdown of every single system, of every single part. So most likely what's going on is these pulse cannons are unique, but the power source that's generating them is probably the same as a Type 10 phaser emitter. And the reason I'm saying that is the phaser emitter is being split into these specialized pulse cannon units. So it's 65,000. Now, if you look at the Defiant and the stats before I've shown you guys, we know that the pulse phasers, each pulse phaser itself is 32,500. Well, if you times that by 2, that's 65,000. So in actuality, these are technically Type 10 phaser emitters, but the energy of the Type 10 phaser emitter is being channeled to pulse cannons. And so that's why it's looking the way it is. And think of it as like a protective, like gel is like around the energy itself, holding it together and making it more concentrated. So the Defiant has 4 pulse phasers, 3 Type 10 phasers, and it has 6 torpedo tubes. Now, the torpedo tubes, most of them are capable of launching quantum torpedoes. So there are two that are located in the front that are around the wing section. And then there is a torpedo launcher, which is actually this triangle part of the ship in the front is actually another torpedo tube itself that's only used for emergencies, and then there's some rear torpedo launchers. So it says that the torpedo systems are a standard Federation torpedo launchers. So these torpedo launchers that are located in the front of the ship are capable of launching 6 torpedoes each. Now, the two main torpedo launchers, they can launch probes, they can launch standard torpedoes, they can also launch quantum torpedoes. Now, the phasers, they're just standard type 10 phaser. Now, and then obviously the pulse phasers. So now let's look at what these weapon outputs are. So the Defiant is using standard torpedo launchers. It can launch up to 6. So that's 1,026,000 points of damage. The ship can also use its pulse phasers. We've seen them fire 40 times in one barrage. So that's 1,300,000. And we also seen that the ship can fire 4 quantum torpedoes, which would be 1,300,000. So you can see that this ship has got an incredibly large payload of offensive weapons that are devastating to the enemy. Very powerful, very efficient. Now, here's another thing to take in consideration. One of the torpedo launchers is actually located in the front of the ship here. Now, that torpedo launcher that's in the front of the ship can actually disengage itself. There are 6 torpedoes inside of this thing, and it can be dropped, and it also has its own impulse engines, and it can fly itself into an enemy target as a last resort to hit another ship with, a payload of torpedoes. So some additional information I learned about is as far as the sensor systems and deep space capabilities. The ship's deep space capabilities are better than I thought they were. So they're using Galaxy class technology, but it's only running at 80%. So the sensor systems of the Defiant, because of the size of the ship, it's actually running around 80% efficiency. So they're still good sensors. It can still do these jobs. It's not as good as, obviously a Galaxy class starship, which I did not know that. I read that and I went, oh, well, that kind of makes sense because, this ship is based upon mostly Galaxy class parts, which is another thing. The impulse engines, they're Galaxy class parts. So the same impulse engines seen in the Galaxy class. Now, the warp core is not the same as seen in the Galaxy class. It's around the same caliber, but it's a micro version. It's unique itself. The engines themselves are also not the same as a Galaxy class. Obviously, they're unique themselves as well. But the impulse engines and the warp engines are based on Galaxy design technology. They're just less efficient because they're significantly smaller. So the ship is going to operate at Galaxy class speeds, but it can't maintain those speeds as long as a Galaxy class starship. So this next part, we're going to talk about the shields, we're going to talk about the hull, and then we're going to talk about the armor system that the Defiant has. And the armor system the Defiant has is pretty unique, and this is the first ship that we ever see using this unique armor system. So the Defiant is constructed of standard titanium and duranium alloys and other components. This is standard of all Federation designs. The notch forward hull has been equipped with a detachable pod consisting of the vehicle's main sensor and navigational deflector, airlock module, and a last resort matter-antimatter warhead. The warp nacelles have been brought inbound to a minimum safe distance for the EM, and the EPS weapon power conduits have been translated to provide a nearly zero lag time between activation, single, and beam launch. All protected internal systems that require access to the vessel's exteriors are equipped with articulating genital hull plates. So what this means is that most of the normal structures you see are actually protected and hidden from view. This is so that they don't get damaged into combat. All right, so we know that this is standard Federation technology. So the Defiant is very well armored. It's got a very thick hull. And we know that the ship, without its shields and without any power by the Bree energy weapon, that 8 torpedoes from the Bree was able to destroy this ship. So if we calculate that, so we know the Defiant's full hull value is 1,368,000. Now, remember, this is the hull value. This does not have the armor system functioning, and we'll talk about that next. Ablative armor hull plating has been in development for a number of years, though various factors relating to materials variability, instability, phaser and torpedo resistance, and long fabrication lead times have prevented the widespread use on frontline starships. The armor works in 2 stages. In the event of a shield-enveloped disruption, phasers or thermal EM is first dissipated over the hull surface, and above an undisclosed threshold causes the molecular matrix to boil off at a control rate, carrying away a large fraction of the landing beam energy. In most cases, the boiling off creates a medium density particle cloud which may help disperse the incoming beam. Okay, so what this means is that as long as the ship has power and it can put its energy towards this protective armor system, which is called ablative armor, what happens is when a ship fires at the Defiant, and would say its shields are down or it can pass through the shields, it'll take that energy and it will spread it throughout the entire armor system. And so instead, let's say you get hit for 65,000. Well, instead of 65,000, it's spreading the 65,000 damage throughout the entire armor system. So it's negating a lot of the damage. And then it's creating that cloud by that process of doing that, which is causing that energy to spread out. Now remember, this has to have energy in order to do this. It's somewhat similar to the old ancient technology which was seen on the original Enterprise, which was the polarized hull armor system. It uses some of those same ideas basically, but this is obviously a much better version of it. So there's an episode where we see the Jem'Hadar fighters come in and then they attack the Defiant. So the very first encounter the Defiant has with the Jem'Hadar, we know that their technology is bypassing Federation shields. Now, the Defiant is hit 3 times while it's cloaked, and then while its shields are still functioning and operating, it gets hit 30 times, and then we see an additional 7 times. So the shields do collapse and deactivate, even though they weren't stopping any of the energy blasts. And so they were hit an additional 7 times. So that tells us how powerful the ablative armor is on the Defiant. So to give you an idea of how powerful this actually is, during the cloak phase of the attack, at 195,000 points of damage, that would destroy a Klingon bird of prey. Now, as its shields were up and being bypassed, it's 1,950,000. That's enough firepower and damage to destroy a Galaxy-class Federation starship. Now, after its shields went down and its energy systems were basically almost depleted, and the ship's taken additional 7 damage, which is 455,000, that's enough damage to destroy a Klingon Kavort-class light cruiser. Now, I'm going to show you guys this to give you an understanding how much damage this actually is. So the ablative armor withstand 2,394,000 points of damage. That's incredible. And now, remember, the Defiant was still functionable out there. Yes, it was, at drift and was deactivated. But remember, later on, the Dominion gave the ship back, and then Sisko and them came back home. So this is how much damage it took before the ship became disabled, but it wasn't destroyed. So the ablative armor is higher than what I'm actually showing you. Now, we do know the exact number, or at least I think I know the exact number based off another Defiant prototype. And I'll actually show that to you, but I don't want to give you that information until I talk about the shields. So there's an episode, and this is when the Defiant shields are able to withstand Dominion technology. This is further into the Dominion War. And so we know that the Defiant is hit 5 times, okay? And so they say that, Kira says that at that point that the shields are down by 10%. So we know that if you were to take 65,000 times 5, and that's equal to 10% of the damage of the shields have taken, we know the Defiant shields are 3,250,000. So what does that mean? That means that these shields are incredibly strong. Okay, so to give you guys an understand, this means that the Defiant shields are 1.85 times stronger than even a Galaxy-class starship. Now, how is that and why is that? Well, the ship is using Galaxy-class technology, but you gotta remember, the bubble around a Galaxy-class starship is large. The Galaxy-class is a huge ship. The Defiant is incredibly small. So they've taken the shield generator of a Galaxy-class starship and then put it on this little mobile weapons platform known as the Defiant. So let's look at some of the stats of the production model. So not the USS Defiant, which is just the, test model, but the actual production. So we know that this ship was able to take 26 shots from torpedoes from a battle cruiser from the Dominion, which is 4,446,000. So that's the newer shield. And then the armor system is able to take 22 hits, which brings it up to 3,762,000. And then it gives an overall defensive value of 48. We could take 48 torpedoes, which is 8,208,000. Okay, so we're going to zoom in and kind of look at that data and kind of get an idea of like how powerful the Defiant ships actually are. So there's the prototype, which is the USS Defiant, and then there's the actual Defiant class. So these are the specifications of the multiple Defiants that we do see during Voyager and then during obviously Deep Space Nine. So to give you guys an idea of how powerful the armor system is, the Odyssey took 15 shots from the Dominion, which would be around 975 points of damage. The ship lost in the cell, was partially crippled, and was in terrible shape and had to escape. The Enterprise D was attacked by a Klingon bird of prey. It was hit by 2 torpedoes, 26 bolts from a bird of prey, and that's 845,000 points of damage, and then 342,000 from the torpedoes. So that means the whole value of the Enterprise before it'll have a warp core breach was 1,187,000. So remember, the Defiant had 5 shots while it was cloaked, 30 shots before its shields went down, which weren't doing anything, and then another 7 as the shield systems went down, which gives us a total of 42, and the ship was still operational. Well, I mean, it wasn't really operational. It was neglected, but it wasn't destroyed. So you can see that the hull value is twice that of a Galaxy-class starship. So now let's kind of do a comparative analysis of a Galaxy class. Now, this is a standard Galaxy class. This is not a Galaxy class during the Dominion where it was upgraded. Those ships have additional armor and things of that nature, and we're looking at a standard Galaxy class right as the Dominion War broke out. It has an attack value of 1,560,000. The Defiant is 975,000. The shields are 1,755,000. The Defiant, 3,250,000. Hull value, 1,191,000. Hull value of the Defiant is 1,368,000. Full defense, 2,946,000 for the Galaxy class starship. Now, you take consideration the armor, the hull, and the shields of the Defiant, it's 7,012,000. So, the Defiant would defeat a Galaxy class starship in a battle with no issues. So this ship is so strong, the armor is so impressive, it can take multiple shots from a Klingon heavy disruptor. A Klingon heavy disruptor can destroy a Dominion bug ship in one shot. It's also capable of destroying a light cruiser, a Klingon Kavor, in one shot also. That means the Defiant is taking a massive amount of damage and can sustain a massive amount of damage even with its shields down. This ship is a beast. So when people tell you that the Defiant is a tough little ship, they don't really know what they're talking about. This ship's not tough. This ship is unbelievably strong. This ship is so strong that it can take on a small fleet by itself. That's how powerful this ship is. And a lot of people are going to argue and don't really agree with that, but I want you to stop and think about this. I've shown you all the stats from the show, but there's one that we're going to talk about that came directly from the crew and states how powerful this ship actually is. To give you an idea how powerful this ship actually is, Kira was on board when the bad Riker stole the Defiant, brought into Cardassian space. Kira said that the Defiant could defeat 5 Cardassian warships on its own. But she said there's another 5 coming at us, and that's 10 ships. And I don't even think the Defiant can win those odds. Not that it can't, that she doesn't think that it can. And this is someone who's the tactical officer of the ship, who knows the ship layout. This is the second command, right? This is the second command officer. She knows the ship's layout, knows the weapons, and knows everything about the ship. The fact that this ship could possibly take on 10 Cardassian battleships by itself shows you that this ship is amazing. Now, I want you to think about this. What you see on screen is the fleet the Defiant thought it might be able to defeat. This is the exact fleet. This is how powerful the ship is. Now, I've seen videos where people talk about the Defiant and they're like, oh, it's a strong ship, but it's, it's just, it can hit outside its weight class. No, that is dumb. That is absolutely wrong. It goes far beyond that. There is really next to nothing that is in this category at this time. This ship, it was said by the Cardassians to be one of the strongest ships in the system, and that's including Cardassia. There's no Cardassian ship that can even come close to the Defiant, and the Cardassians admitted to that. They said this is one of the strongest ships out there. The USS Defiant is, I would not say a strong ship or hits out of its class. I would straight up say it is one of the strongest ships the Federation had ever created. Now, I've seen data tables and I've shown you guys some of the other ships. This ship is so strong. The only things out there that are stronger than this ship is the Prometheus and a Sovereign class starship. Now, an argument can be held that the Akira could take on the Defiant. If the Defiant can't get into range in time, then I would say that the Akira would win. But if the Defiant gets in close, the weaponry aboard the Defiant for medium to close range is far superior than that of the Akira class. Not to mention, the shields are the same as a Galaxy class. It's using an FSQ. It's a good shield, but it's not that great. The Defiant is using the same shield, but it's so much smaller that the bubble is so much stronger. Now, as far as hull value goes, they're pretty similar, but the Defiant is so well protected. It is so maneuverable. If I was taking one of these two ships and going into combat, and I am going to fight to the death, I would pick the Defiant over the Akira. Here's something I want you guys to think about. And this is something I've stated and said, and I'm wrong. And after looking at the specifications, I realized how wrong I actually am. My original Defiant stats are based off a fight against the Lakota. The Lakota is an Excelsior hybrid upgrade. I assumed that it was using Galaxy class weaponry, and that's what my battle data was based off of. My Defiant battle data that you've seen in the past is inaccurate and not even close to being correct. Now that I've redone and watched the episodes and realized what the mistakes I've made, there's something I want to point out. They stated that they don't know what modifications were done to the Lakota, and when O'Brien said that that is a lot of firepower for an Excelsior class starship, this is a man who works on the Defiant. This is the man who worked on the Galaxy class starship Enterprise, which was the flagship, and he was impressed by the amount of firepower coming out of this Excelsior class starship. And this ship went toe to toe with the Defiant. It lost, but it wasn't that far off from winning. I am going to review the data again later on. I wonder how powerful the Lakota actually is based on this data, because it's not using Type 10 phasers. It's using something else, because the amount of energy it would take to take down the shields of the Defiant on the amount of hits that it took is astronomically high. Yeah, so this is one of those things that shocked me. I decided to go check this out and see what it is and show you guys. So the Defiant, using the one that the kids are, the upgraded version, the best stats possible, which would have been during this time frame. The USS Lakota hit for 261,529 per shot. 17 shots to the Defiant and the shields collapsed. That is, whoa. I was shocked when I saw this. Okay, so I want to show you guys the correct formula and then the old bad formula. So on the top is the correct formula, and on the bottom is my old incorrect formula. Goes to show you that I really underestimated the Defiant, and I didn't think the Defiant was that impressive. The way I look at the Defiant now and the actual ability Defiant had, it makes a lot more sense, honestly. This ship is designed to fight the Borg. The ship underneath stats are not even as good as they're around a Galaxy class, which a Galaxy class isn't going to take on the Borg. It's not going to do nothing to the Borg. Nebulas are about the same, and they were just wiped out like nobody's business. So when I see these corrected stats, when I think about it logically, it makes so much more sense that ship is designed to fight the Borg. It's a mobile weapons platform. What is underneath is not even that impressive. I completely underestimated the Defiant. Most people do, and I can understand if someone makes a mistake. I made the mistake, but I just want to correct it. I'm going to tell you right now, the Defiant would whoop the shit out of a Romulan warbird. It would defeat a Klingon Nigvar. This ship is absolutely a beast. Well, actually, we know it could defeat a Nigvar class because it did in the Mirror Universe. So, yeah, the Defiant, no wonder why the Defiant was just absolutely amazing. And I always thought it was strange that the ship stats below, that they would make that the flagship for, the 9th Fleet. Well, yeah, now it makes sense to me. And when we see Akiras and Galaxies and Warbirds being destroyed, and the Defiant took 2 or 3 times the amount of damage that those ships did and still survived, it makes perfect sense now. And I really think that the writers of Star Trek intended it to be this powerful on purpose, because the data is all supporting what we see on screen. I know that they've calculated these data tables on the shows because I've seen these formulas and they matched up and they stayed consistent all the time, which is really impressive because we don't see that kind of writing and that kind of thought, with modern Star Trek. And I just want to share you guys this information. I love the Defiant. It's awesome. It's a cool ship. I have way more respect for that ship now than I ever did. What do you guys think of the Defiant now? When people tell you that, oh yeah, it's a strong ship, it can hit outside its class, do you agree with that now, or are you on board with me saying that this ship is a freaking monster? Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.